conservation voters. I've done this. I've been in this role for several years now. What I do is lobby for and against specific bills on behalf of the environment and conservation community. I also try to work with the General Assembly and departmental officials to make sure that they know that our environment is important, fragile, that there is strong support in this state for positive action regarding the environment. During the legislative session, I send out weekly reports about bills coming up, and also moderate a group of people particularly interested in what's coming up the next week. So now a word about TCV. Tennessee Conservation Voters is a coalition of state conservation and environment groups. Many of you know this group. I can see by some of the names that several of you are already supporters and know about us. So we're environmental groups. We're committed individual supporters, and our dedication is to raising voter awareness, advocating for stronger laws, and safeguarding the environment of Tennessee. And also holding our elected officials accountable. So our focus is basically awareness, advocacy, and accountability. I'll mention what I'm about to say at the close of the presentation again, but if you would check out our website when you have a chance and consider signing up for our newsletter to receive these weekly updates during the session and our action alerts, and also just find out about us. We're at tnconservationvoters.org, tnconservationvoters.org. One final preliminary note is that we hope to have some time to discuss questions after the presentation. So use the chat feature to send questions in if you'd like during the presentation. So let's go. Do we have Colleen? There you go. All right. Assisting me with this today is Colleen Gill, who's an associate with me at Clifton Government Relations. So we're going to start with the basics, obviously. We'll talk about the what, the why, and the who of state-level legislative advocacy and process. The what is the General Assembly. It's the state legislature of Tennessee. It's the counterpart on the state level of Congress and on the local level, city councils and county commissions. It's one of three branches of government, the other being executive and judicial. There's interplay, obviously, between these branches, but our main focus today is on the legislature and the legislative process. Our legislature has also increasingly had an impact on how local governments can do their jobs or not on conservation and environmental issues. So if your interest is, in addition to state, local, this is important for you too, because every year there are efforts to take away local control in directions we would not want to see it go. That's the what and the who. No, that's just the what. The why is we have a legislature because somebody needs to enact laws, amend laws, repeal laws. And that's what the legislature does. And they deal with a variety of important issues of vital concern to Tennessee, and particularly to people who care about the environment, from water to parks to air to land to climate and energy and related things. They're making decisions every year about these issues, and some of them are pretty dramatic. The General Assembly also has the authority to introduce resolutions, and these do not have the force of law. They simply express the views of one or both houses on a particular issue, and we don't pay a lot of attention to those because they don't change the law. What they must do every year, there's only one thing they have to do, and that's pass a budget according to the state constitution. But they always pass a lot more. They pass hundreds of bills every year, but it's a distinct minority of what is introduced. So it's hard to keep up with. It's important to try to work through a group that tries to keep up with the specifics that your own interest is about. For 2019 and 2020 so far, for instance, 3,008 bills have been filed. They always pass hundreds of these, but it's always a very small percentage of what gets filed. They consider the others, or people file them and just don't move them, but they only pass a small percentage. Still, in 2019 and so far in 2020, out of those 3,008 bills that were filed, 671 have become law and changed Tennessee law. Not all of those, not even the majority, are bills we care about a whole lot, but quite a few are. So we're going to move now to discussing the state legislature a little bit and what it looks like. The legislature is made up of senators and House members, as you can guess, 33 senators, 99 representatives. Representatives are elected to 2-year terms, just like in Congress, and senators to 4-year terms on Congress, which is 6. And I want to mention 3 interesting facts about legislators before we get into process. They're part-time. They're not political science majors, and they're part-time. There's some who have retired or semi-retired, but most of them have other jobs in different parts of the state, and this is just part of what they do. And they're not experts on the environment or on a lot of other things that they get to vote on. So they have to listen to somebody to decide how to vote. I think those are important to remember. And then finally, there are no legislative term limits in Tennessee. We don't have a lot who stay more than three or 4 terms, but we have some who stay for a term and some who stay for 20 years. And we have to get to know them. Those of us who care about the environment have to kind of know who we're dealing with to have an impact. Well, let's talk about the makeup of the General Assembly. And there it is. We have charts. There are 33 senators, 28 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 73 Republican representatives, and 26 Democrats. So it's been lopsided like that for a few years. And the point to take away from that is that Tennessee conservation voters and our allies and anyone who cares about the environment need to have support from at least some and a whole bunch of members, really, of both parties to prevail. We don't just lobby one party, and we are nonpartisan and bipartisan, and that's how we look at it. I think we'll turn now to committees, because that's where it happens. All bills must pass through a series of committees subcommittees before they even get to the House floor or the Senate floor. So a distinct minority of legislators really make the difference about whether something gets passed or not. They can stop or stop a bill at any point. If it doesn't get through the subcommittee, the committee never looks at it. If the committee doesn't look at it, the House floor doesn't look at it. Things like that. So because of that structure, it's not quite as overwhelming in terms of how you can lobby. You just focus on committees. But most serious professionals and citizen advocates focus all of our time, or most of our time, on those subcommittees and committee members. Once a bill is passed, both the House and the Senate, and it has to pass with identical wording, it is sent to be signed by the governor and become law. That's what happens when bills go to the governor. They become law because the governor can veto a bill, but almost never does. The reason is that, unlike the federal government, our veto, the legislature can override the veto with the same number of votes that it takes to pass the bill. So a simple majority can just override. So it's seldom used. Governor Haslam used it 8 times in 8 years, and none were overridden. That wasn't because the legislature couldn't, but they knew he was playing ball with them and wasn't going to veto things just out of spite, because he never used it. So they went along with him when he did. And that may be more than you want to know about vetoes and overrides, but it's interesting to me. Now, I think we're going to move to an illustration of the legislation, it says, but it's really about the state website, the state legislative website. All of this is about legislation, but this website idea is extremely important for us as we're trying to figure out what's going on and how they're making decisions and what decisions they're making. State website is www.capital.tn.gov. It's actually one of the best in the country. Let's see. Somebody, are we all muted? Okay. There we go. It's done by a professional staff, actually, and they try to make it understandable, complete, and up to date. You can review any meeting online as it happens, and then you can review after it happens. They keep them for at least several years. So whether it's a subcommittee, a committee, or the floor, you can see it actually happening in real time. Also, you find out how to contact legislators, who the legislators are, who's on what committee, and all things that are possible to want to know about the process, except, of course, what maybe they don't want you to know, and that's the informal process. So here we have, this is the importance of committees and the legislative website and understanding all of that. Moving on to an illustration about tracking numbers. This is what, and this ties in with the website because this is a sample tracking number. None of them actually are like this. They don't have the same number for House and Senate because they're individually numbered based on when they get taken up, when they get officially filed. So that's just a little, you won't find any, you have to search for either number. It's not going to be the same. So that tracking number is hugely important for us and for any citizen lobbyist in particular, because otherwise you get lost. The numbers are important because you can just quickly enter those numbers in the state legislative website. And that is, of course, we mentioned capital.tn.gov. Find out what they do, how they may have been amended, and where they are in the process. Also, you find out who the sponsors and co-sponsors are from that, who voted for the bills committee, although sometimes they don't do anything but voice votes unless requested. And you can find out how everyone voted on the floor, also who signed on as co-sponsors, things like that. So that's an important takeaway. The state website is definitely the key to understanding the legislature. Another thing that's key to understanding the legislature is how important relationships are. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. Yeah, here we go. What they are is the most important tool that a citizen activist can have. The relationship with their legislators is the most important tool that we can have. And you kind of need to know who they are and have some kind of a tie, if possible, before you need their help, before you need the vote. It's not an easy thing, but it's important to work on, and it's sort of the crux of this session here. Why is that the case? What does it matter that you have some kind of, that they know maybe who you are or who the group is you're working with? Well, it's because in many ways legislators are very much like human beings, contrary to what you may have heard. The more they know someone, the more they're going to listen to them. The more they know the group and have heard of the group, the more likely they are to care. That's not a criticism, by the way. It's kind of like who we are, if you get my drift. I mean, it's just the way the world is. So we don't have to become their best friend and go to the club with them, but we need to have some kind of relationship if we're expecting to have a positive impact on them. How do you do that? Time-honored way is to schedule an appointment, either during the session or not. They may say no, but you can try. And in particular, there's the tool of the day on the Hill for people who want to travel to Nashville. The environmental community has done this for years, and we get better at it every year. This last year, we had a lot of folks. They spent all day visiting with legislators. By all accounts, they had great results. Not necessarily legislators were saying, okay, since you're here, I'm going to vote for whatever you want. But it was actually a very positive experience for most everyone. And a lot of credit goes to Tennessee Environmental Council, Sierra Club, and Tennessee Power and Light, who, along with Tennessee Conservation Voters, worked to pull that together. That's only one way. You don't have to come to Nashville for a day on the Hill, but that's not a bad way to do it. I'll give you an example that has worked, two examples that have worked. A newly elected senator from Davidson County a few years ago was asked with and did meet with one of our member groups of conservation voters. It was a month after he was elected, and he was brand new. So I don't know what he expected. He might have been apprehensive, but he came to someone's living room in his district, sat around, I think maybe 15 or 20 people, and was pretty surprised and pretty impressed with the reception he got, the level of questions, the fact that these were people open to talking with him. He didn't know any of them, as far as I can tell. But that was a good experience, and it kept improving from there. He, after that, continued to talk with the group, to talk with me, and at times, even now, several years later, he'll call up. If he hasn't heard from us about something that he thinks we ought to have an opinion on, he'll say, "What do I do with this bill?" Now, he doesn't always do what we want, but frankly, he normally does. And it goes back to that initial meeting. 2 years ago, members of Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association and I met with a brand new representative. We still don't know exactly what he's going to do with environmental issues, but he was pleased to have people come into his office and talk to him right after he was elected, when nobody else was paying any attention to him as a brand new legislator. So that's part of it. What if you decide to go beyond a meeting, which I hope you will, and either a meeting back home or in Nashville? How else do you build a relationship? An obvious step would be to show up locally where they are. There may be public meetings or the possibility of hearing him or her speak, and you can just attend. And it doesn't really matter whether it's about the environment or not. The point is, meet them, introduce yourself, tell him what group or her what group you're part of, and that goes for that goes a long way to help build that relationship. And when you do, make sure you do mention not just yourself, but what group, what issues, what organization you might be part of. The point here is that the more background and information that you discover about the legislator, either through meetings or otherwise, the better off you are if you want to deepen that relationship. You can, information actually helps with the relationship building. If you know who they are, if you know their background. So how can you discover more? There's a lot of ways. I've talked about websites before, but the website you can use a lot is the legislator's own website and other websites of groups that follow the legislation, groups you care about. They'll have stuff on there that is readily discoverable about who these people are, what they've done in the past, what they care about. There's also social media posts. These legislators post things a lot. People post about them a lot. That's your decision about how you deal with that. But it can be tricky, but I suggest that you follow your own legislators for sure on websites, on social media if you can. Financial records are all public. If you give $100 or more, your name's going to show up somewhere. And so are the groups that give more than that. So you can find that out, who supports this person. You can find out who they support too, by the way, from websites, what charities they give to. There's something called Google Alert that everybody probably knows about, but I was surprised when I discovered it. You can Google Alert, and they'll tell you how to set up a Google Alert account, and they will for free send you any reference to any phrases you want, such as Jeff Yarborough, in quotes. You can find out what he's doing, what he's saying, things. And I do that for a lot. Most of them it's not something I care about, but it's easy enough to delete. But that's one way to keep up with the legislator. Then you can talk with other folks in your community who you think are relatively well informed about state politics and local politics and these legislators. Just find out who they are, because it's just nice to know who you're dealing with before you need to talk with them. And particularly nice to know if they've said anything about your issues, conservation and environment related issues. So I'll conclude this presentation by suggesting that as we do all of this, we can do it no matter what we think about outcomes or these individuals' beliefs, and not all of them will agree with us. We can show respect for them. We can show respect for the office they hold. We can be targeted and concise about what we say, and that will go a long way to putting ourselves in a good shape for when we need their consideration, we need their attention, that we get it. We're going to turn now to your representatives. This is really about how to find your legislator. I'm sure that everyone on this call is completely familiar with your legislator, but I'm not really sure of that because not everybody eats and breathes this stuff. And if you live in a big city, you may know, I think you represent some part of Davidson County, but I don't know. Well, stick in your address and they'll tell you who your legislator is. They'll tell you what the number is. And then you'll know who your senator and House is. So I think that's mostly what we wanted to do with that illustration. Oh, nope. We want to go back. We don't want to recess yet. We want to talk a little bit more about representatives, so we might as well use this one. The logical relationships to develop, by the way, as we've talked about, are basically the two legislators who represent you. And that's why we focus on which district you're in. One senator, one representative. But it doesn't need to stop there. That's where it should start. But it doesn't stop there, particularly if you're part of a group. This is extremely serious, what I'm about to say, because, it's just very important. And other groups figure this out, and I think we have to. There are just no examples that I know of, very few, maybe some very wealthy people that I'm not one of, who have any sustained impact on the legislative process as lone rangers. It doesn't happen. It's groups, organized groups that have an impact. It's a little bit hard for you as an advocate to advocate with 132 legislators. So I urge you to join whatever environmental groups you want to, including TCB, but also others. There are associations and interest groups for everything, and that's what makes the whole thing go round. It's not just what an individual wants to say to a legislator, but tying it in with a larger group so that you can have more impact. We obviously like for you to be part of the TCB community. We have a lot of groups that you probably already a part of, and you may already be a part of who we are, but consider that and following legislation as we go through. So I want to turn a little bit now to the future before we get to the questions and answers. We are in recess, have been since late March. Our legislator worked very hard for a number of weeks, and then things happened, and they continued to work for a week or so, closing out the public and every lobby as a process and just making decisions without us, which is dangerous to my judgment. But then they came to their senses and recessed. They are coming back on June 1st. They didn't adjourn. They have to come back. They don't have to do anything, but they have to come back. By implementing that recess instead of adjourning, they the door open to passing more legislation when they return. They may not. They may just adjourn. But what's on their agenda that they still could act on include several detrimental environmental bills, which we're not going to go into today. But we're watching that very carefully, trying to figure out what's the likelihood that they'll just come back and adjourn, or if they're going to take up the bills. So that's June 1st, and we'll begin reporting on that to the people who are part of our network and have signed up for our information very soon. So closing now, to remind you about TCV, we'll hope sign up for our newsletter, weekly legislative updates, action alerts. Our website is how you can do that, 10conservationvoters.org. We'd also like you to be part of our Facebook community. And for specific questions that we probably won't get to many of today, just write me. I'll try my best to get back to you as soon as I can. Stewart, Stewart, at stewartclifton.com. And now, unless there are no questions, in which case I'll make up some more thoughts. But now we'll go and see if there are any questions that people have, or that Colleen has heard from people through the chat box. Anything, Colleen?
Not yet, but if you do have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat to me, and I will send them on to Stewart.
I've asked her to just send me things that she thinks I might be able to answer without being stupid sounding. But please ask questions through that chat box. And actually, since we're kind of getting closer to the end of our session, if something has just jumped out at you that you'd like to ask about, just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Someone asked if you will be discussing specific bills at the next webinar.
Yes, I will be. It will maybe be broader than just those 4 or 5 really specific bills that are still on their plate. We'll talk about, unless I get talked out of it, I'll talk about what's already happened a little bit and what good and bad things have happened this session, and maybe talk a little bit about the future. But we'll definitely talk about bills that are still up there for potential action. It's just we structured this to be about process and not about the content of specific bills.
There's also a question about which of the committees are important to environmental issues. Which ones do you pay the most attention to? And subcommittees, while we're at it.
There are two. The House committees are House Ag. They always call it House Ag. It also is House Ag and the Environment, but the legislature calls it House Ag for agriculture. And that's where a lot of the environmental bills go through, but not all of them. A lot of them go through state and local government because they impact on how local government is acting on things. And many of the most important bills have a fiscal note, costs the state money, gains the state money, something like that. And they go through finance. And each of those committees in the House side has subcommittees as well. I'm surprised every year at how many different committees that comes up. One of the big issues remaining is, will the state decide to eviscerate our current protections on billboards? At the request of the billboard industry, there's a bill pending that would essentially give all sorts of concessions to the billboard industry. This may not be your biggest issue, but it's a big issue for a lot of folks. So that's still up there for potential discussion, and that will go through the transportation committees. So you can never tell where it's going to pop up. But we mostly follow the conservation committees in the House and Senate and the finance committees.
And while we're on the topic, how are committee members appointed?
The speakers of the two houses appoint all the committees and all the subcommittees. The two House speakers, Senate Lieutenant Governor and House Speaker, are very powerful. Lieutenant Governor McNally and the new Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton, are very powerful. They get to appoint every committee chair, every committee officer, and every committee member. It's very important for us to have good relationships with those two folks, by the way. And it's not, we need a deeper relationship with them. I might mention that Randy McNally is a longtime member of the League of Women Voters, who is a member, which is a member group of TCV, and he will always listen to us, in part because he's a member of the League, and they care about these environmental issues.
And there's a question about how many weeks is a typical Tennessee legislative session, and in an average year, how many environmental bills would you say that we work on, both good and bad?
You were supposed to call out the ones you didn't think I knew the answers to. We have to have a discussion about this, Colleen. I don't know that there is a typical. I've seen the sessions they start the second Tuesday every January. And I've seen the committees close often by mid-March or certainly late March. So it's a small time period that they do all this work. And then they continue to meet because the committees have to push the bills further up to the floor. And sometimes it's a few more weeks after that because it takes a long time to iron out the budget. But many times the last couple of weeks, all they're doing is the budget behind closed doors. So it's a small part of the year in some ways. It's January through March and April. The number of environmental bills, it just depends. We have been following, I guess, I don't know if Colleen, if you have a guess there or not, because you've been doing a lot of the monitoring of bills, but we take a broad view of.
I think we followed about 150 bills this year for the environment.
Right.
Both good and bad.
We don't summarize that many, but we follow them because you never know how they're going to be amended. They may sound like a very innocuous bill, and then at the last minute they amend it. So we follow them and then report on a small subset of that to our network of folks. How are we doing on time?
I think we have time for one more question, and I do have one more question here. Someone would like to know more about organizations' limits on lobbying and the line between advocacy and lobbying. I think especially when you are trying to protect your tax-exempt status.
Right, which is what led to the establishment of the Environmental Action Fund, which is a predecessor to Tennessee Conservation Voters. A lot of the environmental did not want to get in trouble with their 501c3 status, and joined together and formed this other group, which has morphed into us. We are a C4. We're allowed to lobby. We don't have limits really on how much we can lobby. Unfortunately, that means that gifts to us are not tax exempt. But we just needed that flexibility and freedom to lobby on what we wanted to. It is a little known fact, apparently, to a lot of people that a 501c3 can lobby. You just have to be careful about how much. It's a technical area that we can address later, but it's a substantial part. Most people go by the substantial part of the organization's resources. Many 501c3s do a fair amount of lobbying, and they never get into trouble with it. So if you're part of a C3, it doesn't mean you can't lobby. You may choose to do it or not to do it, or to do it through us if you're part of a environmental C3. That's about all the detail I want to get into now, because the specifics kind of take a lot more time than that. We also have a PAC that's related to us, but has a totally different board. And our PAC makes endorsements, not in every race. And we're not the biggest PAC in the world in terms of giving, but people do like it when they get our endorsements. So we have both the C3, the C4, the PAC. I've enjoyed this. I hope people got something out of it. I hope you'll stay tuned for other things we're going to do that are more substantive in nature in the next few weeks. Thanks.
Thank you all. And just as a reminder, I guess we haven't made this announcement yet, but TCV is going to be hosting another set of webinars at the end of May that delve more into specific environmental bills and issues. So keep an eye out for an announcement on that on our social media pages and our website.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.